The Consulting Success podcast is powered by the Clarity Coaching Program. If you'd like to work directly with the Consulting Success team and receive personal coaching and support to optimize and grow your consulting business, marketing, and revenue, visit consultingsuccess.com to find out more and apply.
Welcome to the Consulting Success Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Zapersky. In this podcast, we'll dive deep into the world of elite consultants, where you'll learn the strategies, tactics, and mindset to grow a highly profitable and successful consulting business. Hey, it's Michael here, and we'll be right back to the podcast. But first, are you ready to grow, scale, and take your consulting business and marketing to the next level? If so, our Clarity Coaching Program may be a great fit for you. You'll work with our experienced team to set up a strategic plan for your business and coach you step by step in areas like how to consistently attract more leads, develop a magnetic message that resonates with your ideal clients, strategically package and position your services, earn higher fees, win more proposals, and scale your business. To find out more about Clarity Coaching and apply, go to consultingsuccess.com and click on coaching.
Hey everyone, it's Michael Zapersky and welcome back to another episode of the Consulting Success Podcast. Today, I'm very excited to be joined by Melina Palmer. Melina, welcome.
Oh yeah, thanks for having me.
So you are an author, a speaker, you write, you're a podcast host, you also consult, you're the founder and CEO of The Brainy Business. It's just a really cool name, by the way. And you help business owners apply behavioral economics to help them to get more customers and also better manage their team, which I know is kind of the topic of your upcoming book or our most recent book, depending on when this podcast goes live. And you've worked some very well-known organizations, Walmart, Maker's Mark, Mars, and a whole bunch of others. I thought it'd be great to just start off exploring and kind of having you share a little bit more about like what exactly is behavioral economics. I know some people might be very familiar with that term, behavioral economics or behavioral finance, terms that I think have become a lot more popular in the last little while, but others may not have any idea what that actually means. So maybe just start off, what does behavioral economics actually mean and why should business owners even care about it?
Yeah. So behavioral economics, I like to say that if traditional economics and psychology had a baby, we'd have behavioral economics. And the reason that the field came about is because traditional economics assumes logical people making rational choices in everything that they do. And that's just not the world that we live in. We know what we should do often and then end up doing something else. And as you had psychologists and economists looking over the years, either entering into one another's fields or working on research together to try and find if there were ways to better predict behavior and work together, the concepts that the brain uses to make decisions is what has shaped behavioral economics, behavioral science. So I'm an applied behavioral economist. People always mess that up too, where you say that. But anyway, I'm an applied behavioral economist. And so in that, I help people in organizations to communicate better with their own teams or with their clients, customers, members, what have you, to help make communication easier.
Yeah. Where does that interest come from? Like at what point, take us back to your earlier years, where did you get the bug for even like learning about this and the interest in it?
Yeah. So my undergrad is in business administration with a focus in marketing. And when I was doing my undergrad, I remember there was a single class that had one section of one book, just a tiny little thing on buying psychology. And I thought it was just the most fascinating thing. And I said, someday I'm going to go back and I'm going to get a master's in this. Like I know an MBA is not going to be for me. This is the path. This is what I'm going to do. And I spent the better part of 10 years calling universities that all said, that's not a thing. There's not a program for that. That doesn't exist. And, in that way saying, but if you want to come and build a program, we're happy to take your money. If you want to come over here and say, well, if I know what I need to learn, I don't need to pay you a bunch of money to do that. So went into industry and was working in innovation programs and things and just enjoying the work I was doing in marketing and brand strategy. Best way to explain it is like a fellowship within the credit union space for innovation and things, this 2-year program. And they brought in some people from the Center for Advanced Hindsight at Duke University, which is their behavioral economics wing led by Dan Ariely. And they were talking about the work that they did and their research. And I thought, this is the thing I've been spending a decade looking for. And so I made them spend much more time talking to me than I'm sure they wanted to, found out that their work was called behavioral economics, found myself a master's program and jumped right in and knew I was early into the space because I'd been looking for such a long time, but I found everything that was so obvious to me about how this applied to communication, to pricing within organizations, to marketing and brand strategy, just nobody was talking about. It just wasn't really anywhere yet. And so that resulted in launching the podcast and rebranding my company to be the Brainy Business. And here we are.
Yeah. So I want to get a lot more into your company and kind of how you started and where it is today and what you've experienced as you've started to apply this knowledge, into the market and working with clients. But before we do that, I just want to talk a little bit more about this field of behavioral economics and kind of at the core of why people make decisions or why people buy. How do you view that? And especially kind of from the lens of professional services or consulting, if you were to just, I guess, answer that question of like, what is at the core of why people buy, or how do you think about that, or what's important for people to know? How would you respond to that?
Yeah. So the core for that is that even though we all have brains, we don't really understand intuitively how they work. And so helping to get a little bit of that awareness is always where I start. And so if you, listener, you're here saying, if I ask you how many decisions you make per day, average day, how many decisions do you make? And you come up with whatever you think the answer is to that. Maybe it's 25 or 100, or maybe you're going to go crazy and say it's 5,000 decisions, right? Research actually shows that the average person makes 35,000 decisions every single day that are remotely conscious. So that's not like a breathe in, breathe out thing. And so with that, the vast majority can't be done on that conscious, really thoughtful processing level. It's done by the subconscious, and it's doing a lot of evaluation very quickly using rules of thumb for things that have worked in the past. And so the subconscious likes predictability. It likes the status quo. It likes to know things that have worked, and it doesn't really want to hand things off to the conscious brain, which is much slower in getting things done. And so when we think about doing stuff in our businesses, creating a new program or a new advertising campaign we're going to do, whatever it is, this pitch email we're going to send, when we sit down and think, okay, I'm going to make this up. People should want this. They should know that. That's your conscious brain, and you're thinking you're communicating to other conscious brains. But really, you need to be trying to communicate with that subconscious. Jonathan Haidt has a really great analogy, a psychologist out of NYU, to think about your brain like a person riding an elephant. So the rider has that conscious logical plan, it knows where it wants to go, sees the path, is ready, and spent weeks planning everything out. But if the elephant wants to run in a different direction, it wants to sit down and it's not motivated to go anywhere, you can't logic it into going where you want. It doesn't speak the same language. You can't push or pull that 6-ton behemoth. You have to understand, communicate with, and motivate the elephant to go in the direction or the rider wants. So you within your business, when you're communicating, you'd like to think that you're communicating with other riders, but really you need to be thinking about the elephant and how to motivate the elephant. And then the rider's going to explain why it was such a great idea to go that way, down the line. So being an elephant whisperer is sort of the goal.
So I'm going to kind of try and expose maybe a different perspective, or to see if I can push the conversation a little bit into a different direction. I want you to push back in however way you feel necessary. So what you just said makes a lot of sense, right? Many of us, or all of us, are making way more decisions than we even know that we're making. But when we think about the buyer of consulting services, advisory services, this is not somebody that is just making a decision on something that is for $10 or $100 or even $1,000, right? In most cases, this is something that is going to be $10,000, $50,000, $500,000, multiple of millions of dollars. So these are bigger decisions, typically require more thought. And so when I kind of try and think about how do I apply what Melina just said in terms of speaking to like more of the subconscious, is that as necessary in your mind when a consultant is reaching out to a buyer of these services or whatever it is that they're buying, that really does require more thought? Like I would imagine that I'm going to be investing $100,000 or $500,000. I'm not going to let my subconscious make that decision for me. I need to be very thoughtful.
Yeah. Wouldn't that be nice? Wouldn't it be nice if that was how it really worked because we want it to be that way? So fortunately or unfortunately, no. That's not how it is. And there's been lots and lots of research into something large spaces where this all comes into play. And so one study that comes to mind is one when it comes to buying homes. So we would like to think, yeah, if I'm picking what latte I'm going to get, I don't worry about it too much. But when I'm buying a home, I'm using all my logical, rational resources on that thing. No, it doesn't happen that way. Yes, you have some of that conscious evaluation, but there's still other stuff that's coming into play and different concepts. And one of them being anchoring and the way that we're presented information. So I'm actually going to move to a different purchase to make the anchoring and relativity example here, which is to say, imagine you're going to buy a couch, which is another thing that potentially you don't buy all that often as something not as big as a house, but the same things still apply over various examples. So you go into the store, you see a couch that you like, and you think, oh, this is a great couch. And you ask them, hey, how much is this? They say, oh, it's $900. Oh, I'm sorry, my mistake. It's $700. We feel a certain way about the couch now. And this is an example from my friend Brian Ahern. In the other example, you walk in, same couch, you say, okay, I love this couch. Hey, how much is this? And the sales rep says it's $500. Oh, so sorry, my mistake. It's $700. We feel very differently about the couch in both scenarios. It was never $500 or $900, but the anchor that was given to us in the relativity of those examples makes a difference. If when you're going out and buying houses, you say you have an $800,000 budget, your real estate agent knows that that's going to be really difficult. And so they show you some $1 million houses, and then they show you the $800,000 one and you say, yikes, this is a piece of garbage. I don't want that. And you're maybe willing to nudge up a little bit because of something that you saw. Whereas if they had shown you a $500,000 house first, then $800,000 looks worse. All sorts of things. Also, we're very triggered by social proof because we are a herding species, even with multi-million-dollar decisions and the way that we're selling ideas or concepts within organizations. You still have humans with brains making choices, and they are influenced by what other people have done before them, what they've always done, and a love of the status quo, because again, that's how our brain makes decisions. I've had students and clients, but like from Google and whatever, where they're saying, I'm selling these big things. And then like, it's surely not coming down to this one thing, but you could have an entire team that's bought in. Everybody gets it. They've all signed off. And then there's one user way down the line who's the like super user of whatever the thing is that says, I don't like, and I'm not going to do that thing because, and they're rooted in their status quo and endowment effect of the thing they really love and have used before. And if they nix the idea, it's just out for everybody, right? So it would be great if that wasn't the way that worked.
No, I'm really glad that you're giving these examples because I'm sure there's some people who would be listening to what you said originally and thinking, well, maybe that doesn't apply as much to bigger decisions or a buyer of consulting services, but we can clearly see, and I think we'll illustrate further through our conversation, how so much of this applies to everything in our lives, whether in the personal side or the business side, and certainly to the world of consulting. So what I'd like to maybe just do next, Melina, would be to go through a few of the key concepts that I know you're very familiar with and that you talk a lot about in your first book. And you could just maybe define like, what is a concept? What does it mean? And then maybe if there's an example or a story that you want to attach to each one, you can try and gear as much as possible in a way that'd be really valuable for a consultant. That'd be wonderful. Does that sound okay?
For sure. Yeah. Well, I already gave a couple in anchoring and...
I was going to start with framing, actually.
Yeah, perfect.
So I have a bit of a list. Framing. Can you just define like what is it and maybe a bit of an example around it?
Yeah. So framing is that how you say something matters more than what it is that you are saying. My favorite example for this one is to imagine that you need to pick up some ground beef. Maybe you're making spaghetti tonight. You go to the store. There are two stacks, almost identical. One is labeled as 90% fat free. The other is 10% fat. Which one do we want to buy? What feels better to you? I've given this example to thousands of people from around the world, and overwhelmingly everyone says 90% fat free is the one that they want. They feel better about. Logically, we know it's the same, but it's really hard to convince ourselves to get that other thing.
Could you play for a moment on this? And if we tried to like apply this to the world of consulting, how could we apply this concept of framing to consulting?
Yeah. So in the way that you are going to present the information makes a difference of, and so I have the example that came to mind immediately, of course, as this goes, is something that I had advised one of my clients that was more for their own marketing initiative. But the thing is that, so jargon is something that comes up a lot and is bad framing. And so in this case, for a financial institution wanting to have an ad about their rates on what they were offering, so they wanted to have ads that said, You earn 1.26% APY on up to $25,000 in balances. That is not motivating anyone to take action. I got them to reframe it as a question and say, did your checking account pay you $315 last year? And very quickly say, no, it didn't. That's valuable to me. And hey, who's talking about that? I'm curious now, want to take the next step. In that case, they didn't spend any more. They didn't advertise in any different areas, but they had a 60% month over month increase in checking account openings in launching with that campaign. And so actually, in the case of pitching and conversations with people, ending in a question instead of a statement is something that can make a huge difference when you're pitching and doing consulting. So if you think about how many times you've ended an email with, please let me know if you have any questions. I'm here if you have questions, the end, right? You've got it in the statement. Or please select a time that works for you. Let me know the time that works for you. I'll get back to you. Ending in statements doesn't motivate us to do anything. It's really easy to just kind of set that aside for later. Whereas when there's a question that is asked, we feel more motivated to take our next step to do something with that. So if you present all the information and say, did I miss anything? Is this everything you were expecting to see? And then someone feels like they want or need to respond. If you lay out some options for a time to meet and say, which of these works best for you? Is one of these a good option for you? Or do you want to look at something else? And people can say, Tuesday doesn't work, but I could do that same time on Thursday. Right. So ending in a question is a very simple frame that can help you be more successful.
Yeah. I mean, the other point that I'm taking from what you mentioned, I really want to just kind of highlight is how every single one of us communicates information to clients, our perspectives, our recommendations, whatever it might be, our observations even. The example you highlight there with the financial kind of institution is that you're talking about the exact same thing, like nothing changed, but you were able to kind of put a spin on it and shine a different light on it that made it a lot more attractive. So I think the takeaway for everybody here is just to like ask yourself, as you're writing an email or presenting something to a client, is there a way to take whatever you're already thinking about, but to put a more positive spin on it where it's more exciting and more compelling? Okay, next one, priming. What is that concept?
So priming is that whatever happens just before a decision has a lot of impact on the choice that is going to be made. And so all of our senses are impactful in this. And in the chapter in the book on priming, I talk about them in more detail, but some that you might not think about can be very impactful, being an example of a gas station that wanted to be selling more coffee. You want people to come in and buy a cup of coffee, and you could put a bunch of ads up, right? You can have information about some sale you're running or whatever it is, and they may or may not have an impact. What this study did is they actually had the scent of coffee beans roasting, grinding, coming out at the pumps. And by pumping the coffee bean smell, they increased the sales of coffee by 300% without anything else. So you're there, you kind of get the whiff and you go, I've got a long drive. Maybe I want to pop in and grab that, and don't even notice. And for people who don't drink coffee, it doesn't do anything. Someone who's not wanting to buy it, you don't have to. That's in behavioral science. We work in nudges. So you're not forcing anyone to do anything, but just a little something to maybe appeal to the brain differently. So that's an example of a prime. In the case of consulting, thing that I see a lot, I do a lot of work in pricing strategy, and confidence is a problem that people have when it comes to pricing and putting your information out there. And especially when we're setting our own prices and it's not something we would pay for because we're the expert in, it can feel very uncomfortable. And especially maybe you recently raised your prices and you go out to somebody and you say, okay, so it's going to be $5,000. And I know that sounds like a lot. And so if you maybe aren't ready for that, I totally get it. And I could do this grandfathered in pricing because I just switched to it. And I know it can be difficult. I have payment plans and there are other options. On and on, way longer than I've stopped myself here. But you've been through that pitch either as a pitcher or a pitchee. And hearing that information, I might have had a $5,000 budget and thought that was a good price. But the way you're talking about it, you go, ugh, like something feels off. You've primed me to think that it's expensive, that this isn't something I'm going to want, that I don't want to move forward. And so if you can instead prime with that confidence, you want to be able to talk about your pricing as if it's the weather, the time of day, something very simple that you can say and just kind of own can really be helpful. So you're not priming for it being too expensive.
What would that look like just in terms of language that you've seen work, or even maybe how you apply in your own business, Melina? Like when you're talking about pricing, what would be a best practice from a priming perspective to introduce pricing?
Yeah. So with this incorporates actually some of the relativity and anchoring that I already talked about as well. Another thing that people tend to do is when we lay out prices, we feel like we need to ladder step our way up to the highest price. And often the thing that someone wants you to buy is the most expensive thing that they offer. So if you come in and say, hey, so we've got stuff for as little as $500, got a course that's available for you for $500. We also have a package that's $2,500 a month. That's something that you can do. And then there's this $5,000 a month option. That's a good retainer, maybe, if you're interested. 5,000 sounds really expensive when we started at 500 and we worked our way up. It's like the couch again, right? So if instead you want to start high and you want to be, if the $5,000 thing is what you're trying to sell, then you need to make something bigger than that. And so if you were to say, hey, we've got a $10,000 a month package that is something for if you need our team to be doing hands-on work for you, lots of excess, all these things that we've got going on for this big expensive thing. We also have a $5,000 option, which is best for most people. We're a herding species, so we like to hear about what most people do. We have a $5,000 option that has X, Y, and Z, which really aligns with what you've been talking about. And we also have something that's at the $2,500 level that's really intro as an option. Which of those sounds best for you? 5,000 feels much more reasonable because we started at 10, more likely to get that on the way down. We talked about our herding and social proof. We primed and anchored with that other. We framed with our question, lots of tips along the way.
That kind of 3 options strategy is one that we talk a lot with our clients about and kind of help them around to develop. But I think what you mentioned, it's like, if you know that the number one thing you really want to offer or sell, like, is that $5,000 package, creating the 10, like people get stuck on, well, like, I don't even know what to offer for 10,000, or again, these numbers could be 100,000 or a million. What doesn't matter. But the idea is that, like the research shows the majority of people will not buy your 10,000 or whatever the highest level package. But it's that kind of that anchoring, right, that brings you down. And then all of a sudden the 5,000 seems so much more reasonable. So that's, I think the way you laid that out is really good. Okay, let's do one more and then we'll move on. A loss aversion. Because I think this could be very interesting, especially for consultants and decision makers. So just explain, what is loss aversion? And from a kind of buyer's perspective and consulting perspective, what would that look like?
Humans, believe it or not, and probably not that surprising, we don't like to lose or give up things. And so the problem, though, is that we as a society have really set up this kind of gain-riddled experience in this people like things. We should give them more things. But if you're never an opportunity where you might lose something, it's less motivating to take an action. So what research has shown over and over and over again is that the pain felt by a loss is twice as painful as the joy we feel by a realized or potential gain. So if we lost $20, we would need to get 40 to feel equal, maybe, because we really, really don't like to lose stuff. And I know here, this is where people will say, but Melina, I don't want to be negative. I don't want to be negative, like you were talking about in the framing. And the nice thing is, it doesn't have to be. And there is actually some value in it, even though your conscious writer thinks you don't want the negative space. The elephant may be motivated by it. But our brains take ownership over things far before we realize it. And our senses come into play here a lot as well. So especially if you can touch something or you get to really experience, you have someone imagine what it would be like if this, we are triggering an endowment effect that makes it so we don't want to lose whatever it is that's being presented here. So an example that I love to use for thinking about this in a way that's not negative is an overnight test drive with a car. So if you've ever bought a car and had even a single test drive, you're more likely to buy the car once you drive it than if you don't, which is why the sales team wants to get you in the car. But perhaps you went and tested something out and they gave you the opportunity for an overnight test drive. Maybe they gave you a gift card to take your family out to dinner. It's like, go put the car seats in, see it in the garage, deal with this all, whatever. And if you don't want it, no obligation, but we'll go from here. Your brain is taking ownership over that very, very quickly. And very soon, your old car, which was fine on the drive-in, is you're seeing all the, crushed up Cheerios in the back seat and how faded things are, and don't like that compared to this new item. So we're very loss averse, not wanting to give it up when we've been presented with the information in this way.
So let's take the example of a consultant who is talking to a buyer, and the consultant gives the buyer just a lot of valuable information without any charge. So it's just free. They're spending some time. They're sharing insights, perspectives, ideas, opportunities. What does that signal to the buyer? Is there any potential loss aversion going on there with the buyer? I'm just kind of playing through this a little bit, where the buyer might think, yeah, this person could be an amazing thinking partner. They could be a great advisor. They're giving so much information, so much value. I don't want to lose access to that person. Is there anything of that going on from a loss aversion perspective, or do you think there might be some other concept at play there?
Yeah, there's some of that. I think that's playing a little bit more in the reciprocity space. So when we give things to people, they feel like they want to give back to us. This is where with a lead magnet, you may have a loss leader as something you're putting work into to give someone for free or at a discount to make it more likely that they're going to want to buy with you down the line, which could be if you've already given them the plan and the vision of what it may look like and what they could get on the other side. And they're seeing how much work it would be for them to do it so much easier. You already know what it's going to be. I don't want to miss out what's there. We have some loss aversion tied in there, which is, I think, a little bit of what you were getting at. But that's the thing about any of behavioral science, behavioral economics. It would be great if you were able to say, you always use this one thing, and this is the only thing that's happening in this case, and you pull this lever and it works, and that's how it goes. Our brains are complex. The situations we're working in are complex. There are a lot of things moving at any given time. And so the concepts are proven scientifically. They work in many different areas, but you always want to make sure you understand the problem that you're working on, the behavior, what people are doing, what you want them to do. In my book, I talk about the small steps to help people get from A to B and knowing what B is before you talk to them in A, and how you can be nudging them using these concepts when you're trying to have a very narrow focus of, again, A to B, instead of we want them anywhere in the alphabet and we're just going to be throwing stuff, is not going to work out very well.
Got it. Makes sense. So Melina, I got to say, I'm just looking at our time right now, and there's so much more that we could go into around behavioral economics. And we haven't even really touched on all the details of your business. So I think what we're going to need to do is really just encourage people to go to your website, learn more, see what you have going on. But before we wrap up, I want to ask you a couple of additional questions. So the first is, when you kind of look at your day-to-day and what you feel contributes most to your success, to your performance, to your focus, to your energy, are there any habits that you have that just are part of your day-to-day that you feel are really critical to the performance and, again, focus and success that you've created in your business?
Yeah. So I would say being in a habit of generosity and looking to others first, in a give first sort of space, using that reciprocity tactic is something for me where the podcast has over 220 episodes of free content that I spend many, many hours a week producing and putting out in there. But it makes it so I have lots of warm leads that find me. I don't have to be pitching people because I'm putting that out into the world. So, and then also sharing other people's stuff generously first, instead of saying, once someone's done something for me, I'll do something for them. I'm always all sales and business is a really long game, and it's good to just be generous and know that it's going to come back in some way, somehow down the way.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very aligned with that. It's amazing how hard it is for people. I guess it's not really amazing when you kind of know how the brain works. And I think for people who are earlier stage in their business, it can feel very hard to give generously without expecting any kind of return, because you want to generate cash. You want to get validation that you're on the right track. But that long-term mindset always wins out, right? It's business is a long-term game. It's all about relationships. The more value you can add and you can deliver, the more you're going to overall create. So I definitely know that we've seen that as well at Consulting Success. All right. So final question, and then I want to make sure we can guide people to the best place for them to find out everything that you have going on at the Brainy Business. Check out your podcast, your books. So Tom, speaking of books, within the last 6 months or so, what is one book that you have read or listened to, could be fiction or nonfiction, that you just have really enjoyed and you recommend to others?
I would say I get to read a lot of books for and things in setting up for my own podcasts and interviews and things. Recent book that I really enjoyed, I would say, is How Minds Change by David McRaney. He also wrote You Are Not So Smart and has a podcast by the same name. He's fantastic. He also wrote a book called You Are Now Less Dumb, which I think is a great title on that too. But in How Minds Change, he's investigating just that. And he talks to people that have been in cults and people that are getting people to change opinions that have been very strongly rooted and figuring out some of the science behind it. So How Minds Change by David McRaney. And I've had him on the podcast talking about too. Just really, really great book.
Yeah, I think this is such a big area, minds I wrote the Elite Consulting Mind several years back because I saw, and I still have this belief that people can know what they need to do. Like you can have all the tactics, you can have the strategies, but if you're not actually taking action, you can have all the answers and the information, but you could still not be successful. And so the question that I wanted to answer in that book was like, well, why is that from a consulting perspective? And the real idea and the reason it's called the Elite Consulting Mind is because it's mindset and how you think about things. And that's why I really want to encourage everyone to make sure that they check out, Melina, like the work that you do, as well as your podcast, and also the book that you mentioned, as well as just other books on the topics of psychology or behavioral economics or all this stuff. When you better understand how people think and how people make decisions, you're going to be able to apply so much of that to your marketing, to your pricing, to your promotions, or really anything that you do and how you engage with people. So this is such an important aspect of business that I know people often focus on just sales or just marketing or social media, but not enough time, I think, is actually spent trying to understand how the mind works. And when you understand that, not only I think will you understand more about yourself, but the relationships that you have with different people and the relationships that you want to have with your ideal clients and dream clients. So with that, where should people go? Where can they learn more about your podcast? You have, at the time of us recording this, a new book coming out very soon. And I'm sure you'll have a lot more information about that on your website. So where should they go to learn more?
Yeah, thank you for all of that. And I definitely agree with all of what you're saying. It's very much in sync with my thoughts. So thebrainybusiness.com has information on my podcast, consulting, speaking, my books. So What Your Customer Wants and Can't Tell You has been out for some time now, which is a little bit more of what we were talking about. The new book is What Your Employees Need and Can't Tell You, which I think is going to be out by the time the episode comes out. But for everyone who's listening, if you go to thebrainybusiness.com/consulting success, if you've been listening here and you think, you're on the fence, excited to learn a little more, you can get first chapter of either or both of those books for free. So you can read a little, see if it's a fit, and using that reciprocity we were talking about here, right? And if you want to jump in and check out and learn more.
Cool. Well, we will link that up as well in the show notes. Melina, thanks so much for coming on. I really enjoyed our conversation and I was swept away a bit just exploring these concepts with you that we didn't get into some of the other stuff that I had planned, but we'll maybe look to continue our conversation on that soon.
Yeah, sounds great. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Consulting Success Podcast. For more episodes and to subscribe, rate, and leave a review, head on over to iTunes. And if you'd like to develop consistent lead flow and a highly profitable consulting business, learn more about our coaching programs at consultingsuccess.com.